Hey everybody, it's Pat Jones, and I'm here with a very special edition of TurfZoom, brought to you by our friends at Consoles. I am here with the man, the legend, one of my favorite human beings, Matt Shaffer. Matt, how the heck are you?
Oh, outstanding. Really
Um,
good.
I'm glad. How's the fishing at Okeechobee right now?
You know what? I haven't been able to fish. I broke my wrist in August and I've had all sorts of difficulties getting it to heal. So I can't do any bass fishing yet. I'm not allowed to torque that wrist for a while.
Well,
So
so do I need to come down there and be your proxy that I'll fish for you? Is that
yeah,
okay?
my brother comes once a year and every time I take him out one time and he always catches a monster bass. So he's a little spoiled, that guy.
Yeah, I understand how that is. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. What else have you been doing to keep yourself busy since you're still recovering? What kinds of what's a typical day like for Matt Schaefer in retirement heaven?
I tell my friends ask me, what's retirement like? And I said, what you used to do in a day, you do in 4 days, and you think you got to figure out how to do that in a week. So, there's no sense of urgency. That's the biggest thing. So, I still get up early. I'm a voracious reader. I historically read between 3 and 5 books a week. So I read a lot in the morning. Usually don't get rolling until 8:30, 9 o'clock, which is a
Yeah,
huge departure from
I
four
know.
thirty a.m. So and then it's amazing. I volunteer when I'm up north. I volunteer taking care of a museum that has absolutely no money, and so it's all about sweat equity, really, and but it's really very rewarding. It's an old mansion in town and it was severely neglected. So it's kind of nice. Anytime you do something, it looks like you're putting a shine on the penny. And then, I was not the world's best husband. I was married to Merion and Rena was my mistress. So she and I travel a lot. We do a lot of day trips, just hang out. We have good time. I don't know.
Whenever
Down here we do a lot of as Rena call gator gawking and lizard looking, and we fish together, and
oh man.
life's good.
Whenever people say, "What's it like to be married to a golf course superintendent?" I'm like, call Rena and ask her because Rena's done it all.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a family business. People don't really think of it that way. Farming's a family business, so is being a golf course superintendent. A golf course superintendent's wife makes tremendous sacrifices.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's come back and talk about that in a minute. You said you've been reading a lot lately. What are a couple of books that you've read recently that where you thought, man, other people ought to read this?
Well, I get on these jags and I read particularly, I read strictly for enjoyment. So uh, right now I'm into Westerns big time, I'll get on a James Patterson kick. I mean, that guy has co-authored 2,500 books and I haven't read all of them yet. I probably maybe have read 300 or 400 of them. And so I like to read a book that has a little bit of education, but it's primarily enjoyment for me. I took speed reading twice so I can really zip through books with minimal comprehension. I don't really retain it. It's strictly for enjoyment and relaxation.
It's like eating a meal real fast and going, I didn't even taste that.
Yeah. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I mean, if they say it takes 8 hours to read a book, it might take me six.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good skill to have. I wish I continued to read books the way I did when I was younger, but I've kind of lost it. I'm there in FaceTime land and New York Times and all that stuff. So I got away from it a little bit, and I need to get back. I do, however, recommend. How have you read all of Stephen Ambrose's books, the great war writer? Yeah,
yeah, I've read a bunch of his. Yep,
I,
yep.
I, I think that Undaunted Courage, his book about Lewis and
Oh,
Clark, is probably my favorite American history book. It's really cool. So
yeah,
highly,
when I read those, I slow down because there's a lot of information in there.
yeah,
But
it's really cool.
it's
It's
really
really
good.
amazing. So 25 years ago, I moved to Cleveland, Ohio to start Golfton Magazine and got here and settled in. I didn't really know anybody. I didn't know a lot of people from the turf community. And I don't know, you and I bumped into each other, or I can't remember how it happened, but you said, well, come out to the country club where you were working at the time, which is about 10 miles east of where I live today. And I went out there. I didn't know anything about the club or you really. And I spent a morning with you and had my mind blown by
Wow.
by all the stuff you were doing. You were even then you were trying to create ways to make better golf with frugality by not spending money and by replacing chemistry and things that cost money with simple cultural practices and all this stuff. And I walked out of there, my mind was just blown. But yet here you are today, exactly that same guy. Do you remember giving me
Oh
the
yeah, I
tour?
remember. You're an iconic guy. You're not, you can't when I talk to people, I said, Pat James. Oh yeah. People always remember you.
Yeah. But you did you laid some things on me that stuck with me ever since. And I had never seen anybody rolling approaches and even out into the fairways before. Yet there you were with your Salsco, you know, out there preventing disease by changing the composition of the soil a little bit. But tell me about your progression. I know a little bit about your background, but kind of give me the elevator version of your progression through the industry, including the country club.
So it's funny, I really got into the business because I was just a diehard hunter. I mean, I lived to hunt, and I grew up in a farming community. I grew up working on a farm, and didn't like milking cows, but loved plowing fields. Reaping what you sow. I really enjoyed that. And then I was just really lucky. In high school I took college prep and I was in FFA. I took Future Farmers of America, and my advisor had told me that there's a program that'd be perfect for you up at Penn State called Turfgrass Science. And so my dad was very, very civically involved in our little 2,500 population town, and he thought we needed a golf course, so they built a golf course, and I went out and helped with that, and da 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 do. It was game on. So, but when I first got in, once I graduated from Penn State, Dr. Deutsch sent me to a lot of different clubs that were really good. Ironically, one of the places he sent me was Canterbury, and they were having the PGA and with Bill Burdick. And Terry
Yeah,
Bonar was his assistant, who later on in life became one of my best friends.
a couple of
So,
Hall
but
of Famers. Yeah,
I, but I turned that job down because I just didn't see myself living in Cleveland, Ohio. So I started out at a place called Media Heights, which
Mhm.
is down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We stayed there for 4 years, and then I went home to Holliesburg, Pennsylvania, and I grew in a golf course there called Scotch Valley Golf Club. Rode that out until it went bankrupt, and then new people bought it, and I worked for them for a little while, and then I became really disillusioned, and I tried to get a big job, and I couldn't get one. It was Wade Hampton. It was Tom Marzoff's first job, and I went down and interviewed, and I thought I'd be a shoe-in for that job, because I could run a dozer, a drag line, I could run anything. And I didn't even get an interview. So I went to see Dr. Deutsch, and he told me I didn't have a pedigree. And I said, "What the hell's a pedigree?" And then after a long conversation, he told me that Paul Latshaw was going to Augusta, that I ought to call him and see if he needed an assistant. So that's what I did. And he hired me. And after that, it was game on. From there, I was a real student of architecture after Augusta, and I became really enamored with William Flynn as a designer. So I went to this club in New Jersey called Woodcrest. And then our parents were getting up in years, and my wife was the primary go-to person in her family for her parents, and we wanted to go home. So I went to Hershey
Mhm.
as a director of golf course ops, and then my job just morphed. I took over the nursery, the football stadium, they skate, the ice skating rink. I just anything that came up, I took. I was in charge of the gas station, the laundromat, and they turned me into a businessman. I was a golf course superintendent, but then they sent me to classes and turned me into a businessman. Then from there, I would have never left there, but they were asset rich and cash poor in Hershey Entertainment Resort, which was a branch of Hershey. So they
Right.
sold all the golf courses to American Golf. I mean, I was gone.
Yeah. That was a
That's how
di-
I
that was
landed
a different time for management companies. That it was
in.
not a good it was not a good look for any of them.
No, they came in and offered me an $80,000 pay cut.
Yeah.
And so I called Stanley, and he told me about a club in Cleveland that had a very difficult greens chairman to work for, but it was a great club. And so I went out and I interviewed and I got the job. And long story short, Mr. Gleason, that difficult greens chairman, he and I became lifelong friends, even long after I left Merion or I left the country club. And then Paul Latshaw came to visit one day and just dropped in. He and Dr. Deutsch, totally unannounced, to the country club.
Just when Dewich and Lashon drop in. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's like, that's but it was, the country club was just such an awesome place. And it was probably about 6, 7, it was about 8 years after I'd been there. So everything was really clicking. And they both said, "Are you getting ready for member guests?" And I said, "No, that's the way it is every day." And so then they went and talked to my Greens chairman and had dinner with Mr. Gleason. And then, the next morning they said, "You need to get out of here." Well, I said, "No, I like it here." And they said, "No, you need to get out of here." And so I started interviewing at different places, and I didn't get Balustrel. Mark beat me out at Balustrel, but
Mr.
then
Coons,
Merion
right?
opened. Yeah, and Merion opened, and so I went down there, and I was fortunate enough to get the job, and so that's where I finished out for 15 years. So
What year was that? That was 98, 99?
2002.
Oh, 2002. So you had 11 years then to gear up for a US Open.
Well, we didn't have the open when I got there. When I
Okay.
interviewed, they said they wanted the open,
Okay.
and they said we know we'd never get it. So, right away that planted the seed. When you tell me I can't have something, that's the first thing I want. So I made it a point that we had the amateur and the Walker Cup. So I knew if we really shined. And David Fay was in charge of the USGA at that time, and he had a real affinity for Merion. And then we kind of had to win Mike Davis over, and that happened over a period of time. And so it was just everything lined up perfectly. And I got to work with Mike Davis at the US Open and set it up and plus 1-1 on that little dinky golf course.
What's your best memory from that? Because I have a lot of good memories from that time. I thoroughly enjoyed being out there for that US Open. What's your best memory about it?
I think, I was really nervous when we got to 7.5 inches of rain on Wednesday. I thought, that's going to ruin everything. But we had done so much work uh, beforehand. We started doing things nobody else did. We were top dressing greens with ultra fine sand. Nobody had ever done that, and so we started doing that. Uh, and then we had developed our own mowers. Nobody really knew that. My mechanic Robert Smith is I called him the maestro of the mowers. We took heads off of one mower from John Deere and made them into greens mowers because they were 18 inches wide. So, he machined everything and we made like 15 of them. So we could cut really, really low. And through, great efforts with Sal Rizzo, we had created the fairway rollers, which
Uh,
turned out to be a godsend for that event. We squeegeed all that water off the fairways. So they never really played lift, clean, and place. If you let a professional golfer play lift, cleaning, place or lift, clean, and place, you might as well give him a rifle with a telescopic scope. As soon as he
no,
can put that ball up, it's psychosomatic. It's just like it gets more accurate,
Yeah.
So that my interview. I mean, when those guys revved me up in that interview that I did on Golf Channel, when they said, "How are you going to feel when they go 16 under?" And I said, "That's not going to happen." I
I
thought, "Well, I
remember.
sure hope it doesn't happen." So
Uh,
it was a great week. Had a lot of good volunteers. But I knew if we didn't have a good open, they'd never get another one. They'd never get another one.
because the place was too small. It's just too
Too
small.
small, too tight, past its prime, all that stuff. Well, now they got three. They got 30, 40, and 50. So it all worked out good. It was very, very tiring, very demanding. Um, it's why I had shunned championship golf all my life because I watched what it did to Paul.
Yeah.
And it was hard on him at the Masters because he personifies overachieving. And it really took a toll on Paul. That was a hard life he led, I thought.
It was very demanding, and he was the right guy for it. But it was tough. I remember walking at Augusta with him one time on the par three, and him showing me stuff, and it was just like, how do you do all this? How do you balance all this? Because obviously Augusta had a much smaller commitment to maintenance back in those days. It wasn't the same. But
No,
the thing I remember about that event is the people that were there, the volunteers that were there, who were now all legends themselves. And one picture in particular I have where you and Latshaw and Pat Husby and about 6 or 7 other named people are just working on a green, just out there mowing and raking and doing their jobs, just like they were greenskeepers. But no, it was some of the greatest supers in the world. It was really cool couple of days there.
yeah, it was very nice. I mean, we had 300 requests for volunteers. So, and I made sure all the staff members got to invite who they wanted. And I obviously have a list. I could have put 500 in there, but
And that was
uh,
great.
we just did a blind draw for the last 160. We just picked 20 names and we didn't know the people. There was 10 people there nobody knew. And they walked into the tent and they said, "How do you know?" And they said, "Oh, we won Matt's lottery." So, and now those guys are good friends with a whole bunch of us. So, and one went on to work like we got him on at Augusta, and he's worked a couple PGAs and several U.S. Opens. So
Great.
it's pretty cool.
The thing that also blew my mind at the time was your maintenance facility, which you had just completed in preparation. It was kind of a deal point to get that done before you were going to host a U.S. Open, where you had it was the first time I had seen purpose-built housing for interns and assistants and things like that. The way you blended it in, and you had, I think, what must have been the first green roof in the golf business too. Pretty cool. Why did you decide you had to do that out of all the other things that you had to do?
Ironically, what we were going to do initially is we were going to build it under the driving range because um, after the open, we were going to do a driving range. So then Mr. Marucci, who was my greens chairman, he owned a big Mercedes dealership down in Westchester, and the building is monstrous, but there's a full blown garage underneath it. So I went down and looked at it and I said, and we were going to build that underneath the driving range. And then there would have been a face of it that would have faced Haverford College, and we were going to make that all green glass. And it just got to be the whole thing just turned into a nightmare. We could have done the building for 5 million, and then the range would have been another 4 million, and it was just too much money. As it was, we spent not a heck of a lot of money down there building that building, ironically. So,
Yeah.
and then we had a great site, but it was in a neighborhood nobody wanted it. So we ended up back where we always had been, and it was a very small site. So we had
Yeah, but it
to,
was so it was so cool the way it blended in and everything. It was just I'd never seen anything like it. And I have to admit, I have not been back since they did the incredible redo. And I need to get back and see that too. When you first saw all that and with Paul B, what did you think?
Well, it's funny when I never forget. I got to go back real quick and give Terry Bonar kudos.
Oh,
Terry was
okay.
older than me, and we would talk about everything, and we spent a lot of time in the wintertime eating lunches together. And I said, "Hey, when do you think you need to retire? This is awesome." Terry says, you need to retire when you start cutting down the trees that you planted.
That's right.
And the other one was, he said, when you're the oldest guy in the boardroom. So he had retired to the villages, and I had
Yeah.
called him and I said, "Hey, guess what? I'm going to retire." He says, "Why?" And he said, "Man, you're not going to retire after that open, are you?" And I said, "Well, I got a few things I got to do, but I'm the oldest guy in the boardroom." Guess what? Because after that open, all those old guys just went, and a whole new generation came in, and that's when they said they wanted firm, fast, and green. And I told them you got two issues. You have a golf course that was built to hold water, and you have a superintendent that wasn't trained that way. So I said, you need to build a new golf course and you need to hire a new superintendent, which was a perfect. And they said, well, if you sell it to the membership, we'll pay you for a year once you retire.
Yep.
And I said, done. That's a good deal. All I got to do is BS. That's what I'm good at. So, we did that. And Paul B was the perfect person because he'd already been there. The members trusted him, they knew him. He has a tremendous amount of construction experience. He thought way bigger than me. Like I was going to put air conditioning under 6 of our problematic greens, and he said, "Yeah, there'll be
All
the 6 good ones, and the other 12 will be bad." So,
of
he put it under everything. He
yes, he did.
changed a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have done that made it infinitely better. So
Yeah.
it was a good decision all the way around.
I got to get over there and check it out. So, I make a case when I go around and give my speech about the state of the industry that one of the big things that we've seen is this sort of sea change between the folks that came up in the 80s and 90s and had 4-year degrees from Penn State and Michigan State and North Carolina State and wherever, and to this thing today, right? Where all the boomers now are retiring. And I think the day you announced you were leaving Merion was the beginning of this whole sea change. That you were boomer number one in the retirement thing, and that when that happened, and all of a sudden we had Latshaw moving from Muirfield to Merion, and we had Chad Mark leaving, and Zimmers, and all of these wheels started turning. But now it's been accelerating and getting even better. What do you think about this changeover we're seeing in the market from the traditional college educated, working 100 hours a week superintendent to this younger breed where they're good communicators and they focus maybe more on leadership than they do on agronomy sometimes. What do you think about all that?
Well, it's funny, Pat. I always used to tell people, you know, if you're a good communicator, I'll turn you into a great superintendent because it's easy to change grass, but it's really hard to change minds. So, like, if you are a really good communicator, you'll do really well just about in any business. But, I think, you know, I, I visited a lot of golf courses when I had my business, and this is a topic we talked about incessantly, not about grass. We very seldom talked about grass. We talked about, managing people and, how can we make this a 50-hour a week job and not a 80 or 90 like you guys did. And I said, I don't think it has to be an 80 or 90. I really don't. I just think that was just the way we were all brought up. We were grinders, we were dumbasses. We worked hard, we saved a lot of money, and then when our bodies are all broken down, then we retire and try to have a good time, which is a dumbass way of looking at life, and that's why I like the young generation. They want to live now, and I fully support that. And I'll tell you a couple things I think will happen, Pat. I think technology will help them streamline their job. There's a lot of old guys who are going to hate me for this, but quite honestly, I don't care. there's a couple really good probes now that'll give you real time soil data, and uh, I think that kind of information plugged in with moisture meters
Mhm.
and good, good chemistry and fertilizer record keeping, moisture, good weather. I know for a fact there's a group of guys I'm partially involved with them, so I can't really say a lot, but we're working on a computer program that pulls everything together, utilizes AI to help do analytics and
Sort
predictability.
of a dashboard that combines all the different metrics. I,
Yeah.
I I've heard that discussed. I think that's an awfully good idea.
And with that, then they can start to do things on a more predictable basis. Or maybe, but there's my generation, there was too much spraying. Things were just spray, spray, spray. And now I think, there's going to be a time when you're going to be given allotment of chemistry, and that's all you'll get. Same with fertilizer.
So, I
And when
mean,
it's gone, it's gone. Now there'll
that's
be a
what,
counterfeit market. There always is.
yeah, that's true.
But I think that'll be, so I think if their hand will be forced, that might be 20 years out.
Yeah.
But I think in the next 10 years, you'll see a more scientific approach to turf. When Paul Senior and I grew grass, it was artistic. And I think now it's going to be more analytic. I really do.
There was somebody not too long ago was talking about the old days of smelling the grass to smell the perfume of the snow mold. And honestly, that was kind of state of the art way back when, but hopefully we're beyond that now.
Well, I mean, when you work for Mr. Latshaw, you got a 3 hour dissertation on how to use a knife. You could tell your soil temperature, your soil moisture, your firmness. And I told him, you can't tell the firmness with your knife. It's so dull. I'd venture to guess if you stuck it in me, it'd bounce off. But no,
Um,
he was a real student. He always carried a soil probe and a pocket knife, and I think, moving forward, guys will have their phone out and they'll be able to see the moisture in 65 of their greens with permanent sensors and, utilizing weather and that and soil
well, and the
data.
most important thing is it untethers you from the golf course. You do not have to
Oh,
be sitting at your stupid computer at the golf course to do this stuff. Same
at
thing
your
with
office.
irrigation systems, same way. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do everything on my phone. I even have done spreadsheets on my,
So
so
So now
yeah.
that you mentioned that, though, one of the other things you do on your phone is, and this is hilarious because as you were transitioning and you were making this move, the boomer number one move of retiring from Merion and moving into your next thing, you and I had a conversation and you said, I want to blog. I want to do some social media stuff. And I said, you should, here's all the stuff you should do. And whatever you do, don't bother with LinkedIn because LinkedIn's a waste of time. Yet, here we are. Here I am interviewing the king of turf on LinkedIn now because you created this practice because you're good at practices. You created this practice of posting a lesson once or twice a week about just thinking about when you have to change assistants. What are some things that come to mind? Or thinking about how to determine how dry you want to keep your soil. What are some things you should keep in mind when you go to a board meeting? Here's how you should act. Matt, it's brilliant. I mean, it surpasses anything I ever did in the publishing business, and it's exactly the opposite of what I told you to do. So I'm here today to say, A, I was wrong, and B, tell me about what you think that you've been able to do with those posts on LinkedIn.
It's funny when it started at COVID. And the very first one I did is, and the reason I did it, I had a conversation with a gentleman, a superintendent that was like, I don't know what to do. And I thought, wow, this would make a great story. And I think, where where can I put it? because I'm too lazy to do a blog. So, I went into LinkedIn and I posted it and it went crazy. So I thought, I walked into my office. I walked into the golf course this morning and I don't have a crew, but my grass is still growing. It's COVID. What do I do? And so then I thought, well, I'll just keep writing until I run out of ideas. And Pat, I never series now series are easier, but normally I just write and Saturday morning, I maybe Sunday, Saturday afternoon or Friday afternoon, if I'm fishing, I might come up with an idea. And once in a while, I'll come up with something really good and I'll put it in notes in my phone just so I don't forget. But most of the time, I just sit down and start writing. And sometimes I don't have anything to write about, but it just starts to flow. You just take a little idea and then boom, it takes off. So, but the big ones, the ones that really resonate aren't our agronomics, it's all leadership.
Yeah.
Agronomics get 2,000 hits, maybe 1,500. The leadership ones get between 3 and 5,000.
Look at you, you know the metrics and everything. This is great. So when you think about the ones that really did resonate, what were some of those messages where people really did get engaged with what you were saying? Do you remember some really big ones?
It's yeah. Well, one it's I I got fired. What do I do? I did one of the. I did a couple of those, and I did it one. I think I did one. It got like 9,000 hits. It's like, when do you worry about getting fired? I used to ask that to my dad. When you worry about getting fired? So I
Yeah,
did one on proactive versus reactive, and it was monstrous. And
yeah,
actually, that one got hit about 15,000 times, but it got hit by all sorts of industry outside of turf. It
yeah.
just got picked up and repushed and picked up and repushed. And I got notes from people in advertising, all sorts of business people. I said, I just love that. So, but I don't know. I don't even read. Some of them are, I try to write like I talk. So it's
Yes.
like easy to understand.
No, it's
I
you,
try to
you,
make sure guys do that
right.
when they talk.
Your style reflects who you are, and it's conversational and it's great. But is it a book? Because you've how many? I mean, you've got hundreds and hundreds of posts on there now, and
And I
it's
don't even, and I don't keep them. That's the other thing. Everybody says, oh, you must keep them. I said, no, I fire them out and that's it. Now they're on LinkedIn. But you remember when I forgot my password and I had to start over
I do
and I
remember
lost all those other ones?
that.
It's, but I do have a friend that said he's taken all of them. He has them all.
Okay.
And he said, maybe when you start making carbon, I'll take them and try to put them into a book in your remembrance or something. And I said, that'd be nice.
Well,
I, I was gonna,
let's do
a
that
bunch of
before you're making
superintendents wanted
carbon.
me to write a book for members, like Turf for Dummies.
Yeah.
And I should probably do that. I don't know if I'm disciplined enough, but
Well,
maybe.
I think you have a good start on it, and because what you write about is practical, and it's from a point of experience, and you give them insights that you give them the insights they're looking for, right? It's easy for me outside in to say, well, you should do a better job of communicating, and you should do videos and blah blah blah. But you can say in 1988, here's where I was, and how I screwed up, and here's how I fixed it. That's more relevant. That's relatable.
And it's
So
true, when in your beginning of your career, you hope you can do it. In the middle of your career, you're thinking, man, I can do it. And then towards the last third, it's like, man, game on. And so, like, I'm trying to help them get from expedite from the beginning to the end, and help them try to think about minimalism, less is more. And it's a great topic to talk to your members about because a lot of members don't think you're an environmentalist when I've hardly ever met a superintendent that's not an environmentalist. They all love nature. They have a great appreciation for photography. They're just, they like they're very observant, so, my orthopedist, which every superintendent will have, I said, why is my neck so bad? He said, because you look down all your life, you
Yeah.
know,
Look up.
look up. We never did. We were always looking for disease and insects and, wear and tear.
My years ago, my friend Adam Garr, when he was still a superintendent, wrote a column for GCI Magazine's Turf Heads Take Over issue, and it was called "Look Up." And it was just that exactly what you're talking about, that, and not just from a physical standpoint, but also kind of from an emotional standpoint of, you can't just be focused on what this, you got to look up and think about the bigger world sometimes too. So I know Rena probably helps you do that.
Well, now, yeah, I mean, I could get very myopic when it was July and August, I want to tell you. And when I was hanging on for dear life, I wasn't thinking about much of anything else.
I would guess not. So you have one of the more interesting handles on Twitter, which is Matt, I like my turf dry or really dry Shaffer or something like that. But that's a statement. That's a statement about kind of philosophically, your core belief is drier is better. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I
Talk
mean, I
about
had a
that.
couple. I mean, people say, how'd you grow grass? And I said, I just had a couple of really hard, fast rules. One was I didn't water. I was an anti-salt guy, and I was a team leader. It was never me, myself, and I. It was always us, we, and them. So, we tried to spread the angst so that all of us had an even lift and nobody was lifting too much. And I taught them all how to water, and it's serving them well now, and they're in demand. These guys are, they're highly sought after, and they're. I mean, it's a hard way to. You can't explain it. It's one of the hardest things there is to teach, and you have to see it to understand it. And so it's a feeling thing. It's when you run where we ran, which was right out on the edge of the abyss. It's like if our pump station went down, our golf course would have died because there just wasn't any moisture in the ground. We never watered up. That's the worst thing I think you can do.
Right. So when you think about moisture management, part of it's hand watering, minimal irrigation, hand watering is part of it. And this is with some respect to our sponsors from Aquatrols. Is there a role for wetting agents and a role for other types of supplements that you can use to create turf? And we've got a whole new generation of turf grasses now too. There's a new generation of species out there. How has that evolved, and what does it feel like today versus you and Paul are trying to teach people how to hand water 25 years ago?
Well, actually, I think I'm actually amazed how good. I was actually afraid of wetting agents. I'll be honest with you because of how well they perform. You know, Wetting agents and Matt Shaffer were a recipe for punk. I mean, it's unbelievable. Now, I will say, I think with the advances in wetting agent, that you can grow some really stellar turf on good constructed greens with overhead irrigation.
Yeah,
And and uh and there's and I would, I mean, I wish if I were young, I'd be really a student of wetting agents. And some of my guys are really good, like Aaron McCurdy really understands wetting agents and he uses them to his advantage and he has a stellar golf course. Now
yeah,
he still hand waters, but I don't know that he hand waters as much as we did. I mean,
yeah,
some of the stuff I did was stupid. I mean, we hand watered fairways for the Open, so that's ridiculous.
right.
Um, and I think now with wetting agents and the advancement of irrigation, you can you can have really, really stellar turf
Yeah. So
without
so maybe
intensive labor.
it's evolved a little bit. And then the labor issue, that's what I was going to get to,
Oh,
is we don't really have the choices that we used to have because you can't have, when you're down to 5 or 6 people on your team, post kids going back to school or whatever, it's not really a good use of superintendents and assistants' time to be out there on the end of a hose. So that's probably one of the factors that's driving a lot of I think the change in attitude about how you get to dry conditions and how you get to the right moisture.
Well, and I think the other thing too is, I think utilizing wetting agents wall to wall so you can get more golf out in inclement weather is a big deal. I mean,
Yeah,
it's probably expensive, but in the reality of things, somebody ought to probably do a cost study. When you lose, like in Hershey, we sent out 250 golf carts, sometimes twice a day. Well, you know what? If you were spraying wall to wall with wetting agents at Hershey, it would pay.
yeah, right.
Because lost rounds are expensive.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
that's exactly
so,
right. It all comes down to
so,
ROI.
yeah, yeah. I mean, most of the time, public golf courses put their carts in the fairway because it's the most conditioned turf
Right.
instead of out in the rough. So, but I mean, I think with really good wetting agent program out in your rough, you can keep them infinitely drier and incur a whole lot less damage during oversaturated conditions.
Yeah.
There they
So
go. That's a study for them to try. You know.
well, they have a lot of stuff going on. You should go visit their farm. They have a full blown research farm near their headquarters in New Jersey called Aura Farms, and they built purpose built lysometer systems underneath several simulated green things, and then they have a couple of golf holes they built. So it would be a fun trip for you to make, and it's not that far from where you are in the summertime. Final thoughts about when you think about how you want to be remembered. I mean, I remember you as the guy who was always unafraid to say the sometimes unpopular things, but also to say what needed to be said about the state of being a golf course superintendent these days. What contribution do you want to be remembered for? What do you think is the most important sort of crusade that you've led?
I think I want to be remembered by the people that I taught and the people I helped. I think I helped a guy negotiate a lifetime contract before I got on the phone with you, and it was awesome. I mean, he's got a great job. He's done a great job. He's 47. He's right in the sweet spot. Should I go? Should I stay? And I said, "Are you happy?" He says, "Deliriously." My wife, I mean, he has a great job. The club pays $10,000 a year for his children to go to college. Uh, and he said, but how do I stay? What do I do when I'm 55? Then I'm in trouble. So we dialed up a program for him to protect himself and sign a lifetime contract. So and the long and the short of it is, it comes down to two things. It's really, I said, look, before you do this, you got to do a sell job, and tell them, look, it's advantageous for you to keep me. I've been here for 25 years and I intend to work another 16. If I leave and somebody else comes in and they say, well, I don't like green equipment, you're going to have to buy red equipment. What I'm about to ask you for is significantly less than that transfer of act. So, and then I said, you just need protection. You need a 3-year buyout. So when you get to 62 and you want to get to 64 and you get a
You're
new
done.
GM and let's get rid of the old guy. I said, yeah, bring it on. By the by, you owe me 335,000 for 3 years. All of a sudden, you're starting to look a little better in his eyes.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I told him just ask for 100,000 for 8 years after you retire. Because I said, when you get to that point, your house is paid off, your kids are educated, you've already saved $2 million in your 401k, and now you wish, man, I wish I would have bought a retirement home in Florida. But I don't really want to dive into my retirement. So what do? Well, I got 100,000 a year that I wasn't planning on. I'll get down there and buy a house.
To me, this sounds like a version of something you and I have talked about before, which is the value of learning how rich people think.
That's exactly right. You have to understand when you're negotiating a contract, everybody wants to win. So when you have a number in your head, make sure that you amortize it out over a long distance, and then all of a sudden it doesn't seem like a big deal. I mean, if you ask for 800,000 up front, they'll balk. But if you ask for 800,000 over 8 years and you're asking 15 years in advance, they're going to plop down 40,000 and they'll have that money.
Yeah, right. Right.
They'll have
Um,
that, they'll be rolling, and then they'll probably offer that 25-year deal to any other club member or any other key employee that has that many years service. It's a big deal.
good for you for renting out your brain for free, it sounds like in that case, but
Oh
maybe
yeah, I
some,
always help them out for nothing.
yeah, just to be helpful. But I do recommend that everybody, if you're not looking at LinkedIn, you should for no other reason than Matt's weekly updates. And you damn well need to turn it into a book, Matt. Come on, man, we'll figure this out. You and I can do this together. We don't need
We
to wait
could do it
until you
together.
turn it.
That'd be fun. That'd be
Okay.
fun.
All right.
Yeah.
So everybody that's watching this right now, we're all going to give Matt a hard time until he agrees to do this book because we need it because he knows how rich guys think, and that's the most important skill you can have in this stinking business.
That's exactly right. Know your audience, right?
Exactly. Um, Matt, thank you so much. We could talk all day, but maybe we'll go back and do round two at some point in the future. But again, as always, I want to thank the nice people from Aqua Trolls for making this possible. But Matt, I really want to thank you for all you taught me because you put up with my idiotic nonsense for
Right.
a long time.
There's nothing more valuable in my life than my friends, and you're a good friend, Pat. I'm honored to have you as a friend.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. So you have a good day. I hope you catch some fish as soon as your wrist gets better. Like I said earlier, I'd be happy to come down there and be your fishing assistant
You're always
anytime.
welcome to come down. Yep.
Okay. All right. We'll see you on the water in Okeechobee.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Matt. Take care, everybody.